I have come to my grandparents' house in the country after 2 months in a Tokyo junior high school. My parents have been heroic in their quest to preserve the Japaneseness of their 2 children. In America, a sheaf of yellow paper arrives each month from a correspondence school. It is homework in Japanese, which will teach us the characters we will need to read a newspaper. My parents' plan was to bring my older sister and me back to Japan each summer so we could attend school in June and July. We began at a private school called the Family School, whose mission was to assimilate returnee children like ourselves into Japanese society. When I was in 5th grade, my parents decided the family school was inadequate. How could we learn to be Japanese from returnee children? They enrolled us in an ordinary Tokyo public school. Perhaps my allergy to assimilation began at Higashiyama School in Matsumoto Sensei's 5th grade class. The class had a darling. When she stood to answer a question, the other girls would croon, "Kawaii." The class also had a pariah, a stoop-shouldered mumbler. He would elicit the cry, "Cry!" Matsumoto Sensei smiled benignly at these rituals. It was good to come to a consensus. The Japan scholar Edwin Reischauer once compared the Japanese to a school of fish darting one way together, then if it's startled, darting the other, but always in synchronicity. I have seen such fish in the Boston Aquarium, and have seen them move together as if each fish were a single scale on one larger fish. I have looked to see if there was a single fish out of place, and have realized that if I cannot find that fish, it may be because I am in. My parents emphasized that the grades on my Japanese report cards were unimportant. This was an education in becoming Japanese. Becoming Japanese required an ability to read my social situation, and this I could not do. I clumped indoors with my outdoor shoes, or called a student in the grade above me by her first name. I passed Japanese language, but failed Japanese culture. My sister, who has settled down in Tokyo, on the other hand, has gone so native that the Japanese complement her English. I used to marvel at how she passed as Japanese, until one day in college, I watched her answer the telephone with Japanese mannerisms and realized she was no longer passing. She was Japanese. In Japan, perceptions of an individual's race do not rest on biology alone. Both my sister and I have the blood and skin of the Japanese, yet while these biological traits were necessary to our status as true Japanese, they were not sufficient. Our race was also defined by our behaviors. It would be some time before I would apply that insight to my identity as an Asian American. I was, of course, aware of the demand to assimilate to American norms. I had spent 2 days in my Boston nursery school before my mother received a call from my teacher, who complained I was teaching the other children Japanese, and asked my mother to stop me before I confused them beyond recall. At dinner, my parents gently impressed on me that while I should be proud to be Japanese, I should also keep it private. That was the first iteration of what would become a motto at home: be 100% American in America and 100% Japanese in Japan. That motto shaped my parents' lives. They created a racial sanctuary within their Boston apartment, keeping Japanese magazines and newspapers in their bedroom. It was on their king-size bed, beneath a massive scroll I could not read, that I tested my Japanese on newspapers, whose vertical print smudged so easily under my finger. Public spaces of the apartment where guests might roam were filled with other books in English, so clearly meant for show that I never thought to read them. I once took down David Copperfield from an endless row of navy hardcovers decorated in gold. It was abridged. The shelf looked gap-toothed without it, so I quickly slid it back into place. As a young child, I took the motto at face value. I was usually the only Asian child in my classes. Surrounded at all times by whites, I could half forget my difference. Recently, a white friend of mine, who is a Japanese literature professor, said the object he most hates while in Japan is a mirror. In the absence of reflection, he can pretend he is Japanese. Surrounded by Japanese, speaking Japanese, what else could he be? Listening to him, I saw my own childhood aversion to mirrors in a new light. Only when I went to boarding school did I encounter Asian Americans in any numbers. In one of my first calls home, I mentioned to my father that there were many Asians here, and they even had a group. My father asked if I was planning to join it, and I said I didn't know. "What can they teach you that you do not already know?" he asked. This sounded familiar. In Japan, he had pulled me from the family school because only pure Japanese could teach me to be Japanese. Here, I heard him saying only pure Americans could teach me to be American, and pure in this case meant white. I joined the student government instead. In hindsight, I see my father and I misunderstood the purposes of the Asian American group, one of which was to resist the notion that American meant white. Yet I still appreciate what my father wished for me. He wanted me to be at the center of any experience, Japanese, American, or otherwise. I will always be grateful to him for teaching me to be bold, to be unafraid of the center. I suspect other minority students were getting similar advice from their parents. Many of the racial minorities at the boarding school were likely to assimilate to white norms. Some behaviors were common across groups. Avoiding ethnic organizations was one. Choosing clothes from catalogs that featured no racial minorities was another. And each group followed strategies of its own. Asian Americans got eyelid surgery. African Americans straightened their hair. Latinos removed the accents from their names. Did I yearn to convert to whiteness? Asian American friends have described the turmoil they caused in their families when they came home as young children, demanding to know when they would become white. I believe I set my race with relative equanimity because of the racial pride my parents gave me. In this regard, their strategy of shuttling their children between the United States and Japan worked brilliantly. They permitted me to assess Japanese culture as an affirmative birthright. Throughout my youth, they also kept reminding me that my minority status in America was an accident of geography.